Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Fantastic Fungi Reimagine. We've got a really special program here coming up for you. My name is Stephen Apkon. I am a co-founder of Reconsider, a nonprofit that's focused on creating media and experiences around transforming our world and our relationship to life. Also a executive producer along with my partner Marcina Hale on the documentary Fantastic Fungi, directed by Louis Schwartzberg, and also a producer on this album, Fantastic Fungi Reimagine. And that's why we're here today. And we've got two really special guests. We're so grateful for them to be here. Vienna Teng happens to be on the album. And she is a pianist, a singer-songwriter, an environmental activist. She's written code. She's released 5 full-length studio albums, composed a musical, and is very, very active in the environmental activism world. Welcome, Vienna.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. And we also have another special guest, and that's Amy Martin. Amy is the founder and executive producer of Threshold, which is an amazing podcast and public radio program. I think it's been going since 2016, and each season they take a deep dive into a particular story of pivotal change in the natural world. It's earned some of the highest honors in journalism, a Peabody Award, an Edgar R. Murrow Award, has been featured in so many places, and each season has been better than the last. And in 2020, Amy also launched a new series, Threshold Conversations, which features interviews with environmental thought leaders, including J. Drew Lenham, Peggy Shepard, Bill McKibben, and many others. And we're so grateful, Amy, to have you here too.
Well, it's my honor and pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thanks. And I want to start with you, Vienna, because you have an amazing song on the album, Watershed. Just beautiful. And I think that one of the things that's so important for us when you joined this project was that you hold this space between music and the environment. And you have a solid foot in both worlds. But even more than that, I think you transcend it and you move effortlessly between them both. And one of the reasons we're so moved by that is the notion of reimagining for us was that it is the musicians, it's the artists, it's the creators that are able to look beyond and to see where we need to go. And can you talk a little bit about your movement between those worlds and what you see?
Yeah, effortlessly is not how I think of it, but I'm glad that maybe how it sometimes appears. I would say that I really feel I feel really drawn to figuring out how to be useful in the world. And I know that's not how every musician approaches, their craft or their art, but I'm always looking for, what is it that people connect with and then help them to, do something greater than they might otherwise be capable of. And so that's kind of what I keep in mind in sort of both my lives at the moment. And in music, I'm often trying to think about that in terms of whose perspective can I sing from, can I write from, that reaches people in a way that maybe just reading an article or hearing it in a documentary or a news story might not. And so Watershed was actually born out of that. Could I write from the point of view of climate change, of the earth and the changing kind of systems as they're affected by humans and kind of human activity. And it seemed like sort of presumptuous thing to do, but I thought it could be kind of interesting to connect with it almost like as a voice that you can have a conversation with. So that was where that was born out of. And I should also give credit to Jared Diamond, because the whole song actually was inspired by his book Collapse, which I know, Amy, you're sitting in Montana, and I think the Bitterroot Valley actually plays a role in that book and the kind of changes to the environment that are happening there. So, I kind of draw my inspiration from a lot of different places. But then in the sustainability work that I do, it's the same question of how do you kind of stand in the shoes of someone else and say, what would it take for you to do something a little differently, or to conceive of something a bit differently? So I feel like there's a bit of a connective thread in that way.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it until just this moment, but last night I was doing I was having a conversation live with two musicians, Tom Chapin and Jen Chapin. And if you remember, Harry Chapin was a musician and also a tireless activist for around hunger and poverty issues, and also a storyteller. And what he talked about was, what could one person do? And I could just feel that in what you were saying about that sort of being compelled to act in that space. It's really beautiful. And Amy, you've been so tirelessly focused on these issues, and I'm wondering where you came to it, and also in particular around like this film, which talks about the intelligence of nature, but primarily around mycelium. And I'm wondering what messages you might have from the mycelium too.
Well, I mean, the film makes me want to get to know the mycelium better, for sure. It's something that, I mean, I had through learning about biomimicry some years ago, I felt like I had some awareness, but it really sparked like, oh yeah, I need to learn more about this, and I need to figure out how to report from that part of the world in a future season of Threshold potentially. And I love what you were saying, Vienna, about like trying to bring forth a different voice. I feel like in a way that's kind of what Threshold is about as well, but in less of an imaginative, like artistic way, and more just by like pointing the microphone at different things, whether it's communities that are often left out of the conversation, or creatures, places. What does a bison have to tell us? What does a prairie have to tell us? What does an ice sheet have to tell us? And what do the people who are most impacted by not only climate change, but all the different environmental changes that are going on around us right now? What do they have to say? I feel like that's a huge part of what we're trying to do on Threshold, is really broaden the idea of who the experts are, and bring in different ways of knowing and different ways of solving problems by just having a more integrated conversation between different parts of society. So I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, I think you did. And, you brought up biomimicry, and as Vienna is in both of those worlds, so are you, Amy. And I know you're a singer-songwriter yourself, and you're featured on the biomimicry website. I think is one of the songs that you wrote. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, I wrote and co-produced the whole album. With them for them. Yeah, many years ago.
The first film that we produced in Reconsider was a film called Planetary, which Janine Benaris is prominently featured in, as are so many of the people who you've had on your podcast, Bill McKibben among others. But it talks about sort of it's a meditative film on what does it mean to be planetary? How does that shift our perspective on things? Yeah. And Vienna, can you share a little bit with us how you came to this particular project?
Sure. It was actually through my dear friend Amber Rubarth, who Steve, I know you know quite well.
Our dear friend as well. Yeah.
And so she, of course, has been involved in all sorts of really interesting interdisciplinary projects. And she just reached out to me and said, I'm involved with this documentary called Fantastic Fungi, and we're putting together this companion album. And would you be interested in, at the time, she said, would you be interested in writing something for that companion album? And so she sent me the film, and I watched it and absolutely loved it. And I have to say that my husband and I have been fans of Paul Stamets since before seeing the film. And so when we heard it was going to be a film about fungi and like the beauty of mycelia, and that Paul Stamets was going to feature prominently in it, and there was going to be all this gorgeous, videography and time-lapse photography, I was already in. So, and also from my environmental studies when I was in graduate school, had been already like awakened to this idea that fungi are these fascinating organisms, and do so much more and are so much more pervasive and interesting than I think a lot of people like myself were aware of before. So I was already interested in the topic and loved the film. And then I confess I didn't end up being able to do justice to the film by like kind of writing a song inspired by the film. So maybe that's to come.
Yeah.
But I did think that Watershed could be a contribution to a companion album because it was sort of in the same spirit of kind of, you know, there's this narration throughout the film of speaking from the point of view of the fungi. And I'm like, well, I do have a song that's speaking from the point of view of a similar sort of perspective.
Yeah. Well, we're really grateful that your voice is on the album. And a big shout out to Amber Rubarth, who's an amazing force for good in this world and a wonderful creative musician and really, you know, the impetus for this whole project, a producer on the album. She's featured on the album as well. And also to Parmita Pushman, who's been a wonderful partner along with Marcina and I. So, you know, the title for the album was really particularly chosen, Reimagine. And as I said, I think that is what we need artists to do, right? Is to help us to reimagine. And so often in the work around sustainability and climate change and everything, we people can often want to come from a place of fear, right? And it's like, you know, you want to beat people over the head of what's coming and how terrible it's going to be. Yet we've always felt in Planetary that the most important thing you can do is create that sense of affection, you know, of connection, because, you know, we protect that which we love, right? And I'm wondering, in terms of reimagining, we know what's possible if we don't act. But what do each of you sort of reimagine in terms of what's possible if we reconnect in a different way?
I could give a shot at it. Another, I could say, thanks that I have to Fantastic Fungi, the film, is that we were having conversations recently in the nonprofit that I work for, and we were thinking about, like, could we choose a new logo, a new kind of mascot or something like that. And then it sort of devolved into this conversation about, like, well, for each of us personally, what is our spirit animal? And I said, well, I don't know if I have a spirit animal, but if I had a spirit organism, maybe I would choose a fungus.
That's cool.
And because the reason, and everybody thought, oh, that's really weird. But I said, no, let me explain, because I think one of the things that I've learned from having a music life and a, you know, programmer life and a sustainability, you know, advocate life is I really am trying to just kind of connect all the different ecosystems together and to kind of, you know, exchange nutrients and, you know, like exchange ideas and figure out, like, how do we kind of create something bigger and more vibrant and more beautiful by kind of bringing all these together. And so that's the role that I want to play. And so that's kind of how I think about it. And so maybe to answer your question, I do think that the world that I imagine is one, like you said, I love what you said, that, you know, affection is really what kind of activates the best in us. When we know that there's something precious to us that we want to protect, something that we relate to, that we have, that we are in relationship with. And that's what I would like to do more of, is building these relationships that build that affection. And so you feel like, you know, I understand this person on, you know, the other side of a political spectrum. I understand this natural world that I'm so connected to. And, like, I want all of us to be part of something better. And, like, so let's see what we can do.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how about you, Amy?
Well, it's an interesting question for me right now, because we're just getting ready to start working on some new projects in 2021. And really, your question gets to the heart of what I think we are grappling with at Threshold and what I want us to do on the show. And I guess for me, maybe it's because I am coming from a journalism place right now instead of my, like, a musician place. Not that those are 100% distinct, but, you know, it's sort of a different part of my brain, that I actually feel like it's really important to try to build connections between those two things that you were talking about, between the fear and the hope and the love and the reimagining, and that in any conception of how to move forward here, that sort of banishes one side of that to like, we can't think about that. I think that doesn't work. Like there are reasons to be really scared, and there's a certain, there's and to be mad and to be feisty and to push hard, and to push with urgency. And if we only have that kind of energy in the mix, you know, it becomes, you know, righteous and dark and off-putting. And on the other side, if we're only feeding the love, or I mean, I also think we need to really feed the love and the hope and the affection and the wonder that's at the heart of the whole deal. So I'm trying to figure out ways that we can do some reporting and storytelling that marries that, so that all of this complicated experience we're in right now can be part of how we figure out how to move forward. That's really abstract, I'm realizing.
No, it isn't. I love that actually, because really what you're saying is it's about the integration of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't mean to imply that like getting angry is the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's more just getting stuck in the like using fear to motivate somebody, because I think it's so overwhelming that,
Yes.
you know, I was having a conversation a while back with two environmentalists. They happened to both be clergy members, and they had been on a panel, and one was taking the position that we had passed the point of no return.
Mm.
And the other one had taken the position that there was still time to turn it around. And I heard them going back and forth, and I stopped them at one point and I said, you know, aren't you asking the wrong question? Because it seemed to me the question is, if you frame it in that mode, it's a transactional question, right? It's, if I do this, will it make a difference? As opposed to, how do I want to live my life as an expression of gratitude for life itself and connection with this natural world that I'm a part of and not separate from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, yeah.
And I also feel like, you know, the main people, and I can count myself among them, who I hear kind of in this kind of hand wringing of like, should I be more scared? Should I be more hopeful? How much hope should I have? How everything? It's mainly really privileged people. Like if you're on the ground and like the shit is hitting the fan, you don't really have time to worry about what is the appropriate emotional response. You just like get to work, you know? And I think that's kind of that's where I feel like it all sort of comes together in a very pragmatic and ultimately powerful way, because then we start to be able to marry our need for solutions with like the immediacy of like, okay, but what can we do right now? What are the steps we can take today, you know?
Yeah. Doesn't it seem a little crazy that we're going through this pandemic, and the conversation we're having is, what are we willing to sacrifice to save a few 100,000 lives, which of course is really important, right? But you know, we're not really willing to have the conversation about what are we willing to sacrifice to save humanity's existence on this planet. I mean, I laugh, but I cry inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do feel like a lot of this speaks to, I love what you said, Amy, about that, you know, the anger and the fear is absolutely, you know, valid and part of the whole mix, and in many places quite necessary, right? That's what leads to the energy to organize and the energy to push for better, and the energy to, in some cases, like, you know, undo or override the things that need to be undone or overridden. And maybe not, hopefully not to beat an analogy or a metaphor to death, but like, again, I think about fungi, right? Like the reason most people immediately think of it as like fungi, why are we talking about mushrooms? Because they think of it as like weird, decay related, creepy stuff, sometimes poisonous, all that sort of stuff. And they play such a vital function. So, you know, destruction is part of it. And, you know, darkness, you could say, is part of it. And the fact that, you know, we need to kind of think of it as a whole and think about like, you know, doing the work, and holding all of that as a kind of both and, like, yes to, you know, to all of it. That's kind of what I've been trying to internalize and think about these days. And it brings me back to like, well, just get up each morning and do the work. And despair is sort of a temporary thing that I indulge in sometimes, but you know, it just comes down to like, what am I going to do today? And who am I going to talk to today? What am I going to think about in terms of what direction I take to contribute to some chance of this getting to a good place? And I think that there is some ways in which we pass points of no return, and there are definitely signs of the way that we're not going to be able to figure this out or get our act together. And I think the activists who are really good at this stuff see all that, and they know all that, and they also move us all forward.
Show up.
I love bringing the fungi metaphor and reality into it, because it speaks to the fact that part of the process of growth is also digesting what is dead and turning it into something else, transforming. And I think that in our our current economic system is just built obviously on endless growth without any sense of attention to that part of the cycle. And I think that's partly what leads us into these dead ends when we think about reimagining and building different worlds, is that, like, if the only thing that we have sort of conceptual space for is more and better and bigger and grow, what happens when we do need to, like, digest the crap that's, like, just sitting on the forest floor that needs to get ground up, and and so I you're making me think.
Which is a good thing. And it's also, look, I mean, it also relates to our relationship to our own mortality.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's not just more growth and bigger and better and longer. It's also that sense of not being willing to come to grips to death and birth, right? And to being part of that natural cycle.
Yeah, to the extent that we have leaders, denying the existence of a pandemic that is, killing millions of people. It's all part of that, of just like, no, that part doesn't happen. It's not real, not me, and it's really, I think we're getting a really hard dose of the dysfunction of that. And, like, we need the fungi actually, and in the fungi parts of human societies to, like, take care of what needs to be gone so that new things can grow.
Yeah. You can't help but see Suzanne Simard talking about the mother tree in the film, or her work in her TED Talks or YouTube videos, and be amazed at the extraordinary intelligence of the mycelium and the whole ecosystem, I mean, it takes you back to biomimicry. And understanding the intelligence of the natural world, and not seeing ourselves separate from that or superior to that in some way. It was just with a Lakota elder, a good friend of ours, who happened to also be in Planetary. Tiokasin goes to us. I was with him today, and he was talking about community. And we started to list out all of the different members of the community. And he stopped at one point and he said, in Lakota, there isn't a word for community, but the way that we envision community, it includes the trees, it includes the soil, it includes all beings, it includes the earth, so that sense of community and being in communion with, there's a whole different conception of it that's not just, human centric.
Yeah.
I do feel like that's our next horizon, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will say that for myself, I sometimes have a moment of feeling skeptical of, like, over romanticizing the natural world, because there's a lot of brutality to it, right? There's a lot of pretty intense things that fungi and other organisms do to each other. And I think part of what human beings, we're trying to figure out is, like, well, what parts of that do we want to imitate and take inspiration from? And what do we feel like we have the opportunity, like you said, with the Lakota elder, to kind of take the bigger picture and say, like, how can we be wiser, kinder than kind of like the first notion of how to handle something. So I think it is, like, we are part of nature, and yet we're also trying to figure out, like, since we kind of, like, hold the whole, we are capable of holding the whole picture in our heads. What do we do with that? And what does that call us to? What standard does that hold us to?
Yeah. Beautiful. There's something about music that takes us, that's sublingual, that takes us beyond the words, even if there's lyrics in it, right? The music transcends all of that. And before we continue the conversation, I would love to ask you, Vienna, whether you'd be open to sharing some music with us right now.
Sure. Let me see what I can do here. So this is not Watershed, the song on the Reimagine album, but it is one that maybe speaks to some of what we've been talking about. It's called The Last Snowfall. If this were the last snowfall, no more halos on evergreens. If this were my last glimpse of winter, what would these eyes see? This were the last slow curling of your fingers in my palm. If this were the last I felt you breathing, how would I carry on? This is not the last snowfall, not our last embrace. But if I were that kind of grateful, what would I try to say?
Beautiful. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Made me
Thank you so much. It was spectacular.
Thank you.
Just beautiful. Yeah. I'm so glad to be joined here by Vienna Teng, who is a musician, environmental activist, mom, so much more. And on the album Fantastic Fungi Reimagine, we're so grateful for that. And Amy Martin, musician, podcast creator, journalist, environmental activist, force for good in this world. It is so great having you both here. And You know, before we go, I was just feeling as you were singing, and I was really moved. And I was thinking, you know, many of us may feel some relief as we're shifting into sort of a new cycle, and we're actually having the conversations, and the climate and the environment has become part of a political discourse. Almost, it seems like for the first time, you know, where there's talk of a climate change czar and all of this stuff. Yet the work isn't done. You know, just a shift in administrations, and you know, we have to be really careful and mindful that this isn't just a passing way of, you know, sort of deferring the conversation and being able to take a breath. And it brings me back full circle to the conversation last night, and to thinking about Harry Chapin, you know, when he said, you know, when in doubt, do something. And I'm just wondering what that means to each of you, because you're so immersed in this world and so thoughtful about it. And it's easy to say, you know, there's a call to action and just go do this one thing. But what if there is one thing, not even necessarily about doing, but that people can take from this and from today and from your work, what might that be? As we head into, for some people tonight, the first night of the Festival of Lights, we're going into a holiday season that is about, you know, birth and rebirth and all of that. Yeah.
I guess, you know, I think one thing that's really on my mind right now, I mean, there's so many answers to this, and I think maybe that's in a way part of the answer is whatever calls to you, whatever speaks to you. But the thing that's I'm really thinking about a lot lately is just the really intense need for systemic change. And as much as it's important to take personal responsibility for all of the things in our own lives, you know, that we want to try to bike and we want to try to, you know, eat local food and all these different things. Those things are super important. But we are at a moment where without systemic change, we're in really deep trouble. Or maybe another way to say it is we're in deep trouble and we need systemic change to fix that trouble. And so, yeah, not only is the work not done, I feel like what's happened with this shift, this political shift, is just, okay, now we can actually maybe start to do some work. You know, so that's and so if your work is telling stories, if your work is connecting with people in your own community just to learn more, if your work is to get involved in elections, you know, I just think from whatever sector of society you represent, like we basically have to turn all of our attention as much as we can towards the intersection of climate justice, social justice, and how we can't move forward without taking better care of each other, and that includes letting ourselves be taken better care of by the planet by not ruining it.
Nice way of putting it. Couldn't agree more.
I love that, Amy. And maybe to build on that, I've found that, yeah, for me, it ends up being a combination of things. Like I found that I want to continue with my whole, you know, struggle and reflection of like, what is my particular contribution? What is my unique, you know, kind of niche in all of this? But I've also realized the systemic change movements are so important. And so sometimes just being one of 1,000 or 1,000,000 people doing a thing that I'm not particularly good at, but that just needs doing, is one that I'm increasingly devoting time to. So if that means, you know, doing canvassing calls for elections, or, you know, doing some of grassroots organizing, or even just supporting people who are doing some of that difficult work, and just kind of trying to continually educate myself on like, where do I need to be contributing a little bit of that time and energy. It sometimes feels a little painful, and sometimes it's hard to know, like, is this making a difference? But I've realized that that's a really important part of what I have to make part of my habits. And so I love that call to what role do each of us play individually in systemic change rather than just kind of personal responsibility.
Yeah. I love that, because you have the personal responsibility piece, but it is in the action of working towards systemic change. It's also the recognition of our oneness and our connection to the entire community, to the entire planet.
And I found it so inspiring every time I get involved. I feel very small. I feel very incompetent and small a lot of the time, but I also see so many people and so many, other members of our kind of natural world family doing such amazing things that I can't help but have my breath taken away sometimes. So when I put my ego aside, it's really energizing stuff.
Well, that's where the freedom is too, right?
Yeah. And it's also such a good parallel for how it feels to be out in the natural world and having a deep experience. Is like that wonderful freedom of humility and smallness of like, I'm so tiny, my life so doesn't really matter. And yet like right now, this is amazing and I get to be here. And I guess, just to kind of circle around, Stephen, to something you said toward the beginning is another thing I would just say is like, get outside, fall in love with something, whether it's your city park or your tree outside of your house, or I'm lucky enough to have like mountains and things to run around on. But I mean, I think partly why your song was really emotional to me, Vienna, is just like you can feel love and true connection and affection for the world in that, and it's so true that that's the foundation of it all, and we all have that. It doesn't matter if we're Democrats, Republicans, what country we live in, we all have that, and it's connecting with that is important fuel, I think.
Yeah. And the integration that you talked about, Amy, of the fear and the affection, right? Or the anger and the affection. It's also the integration of the smallness that you talked about, Vienna, and then also the extraordinary miracle of each of our own lives. So it's holding both of those things.
I definitely feel that now that I have a baby daughter. She's 9.5 months, and not a day goes by that I don't look at her and go, how did this happen? How does that even, that's amazing.
Yeah, there's a whole universe in her.
Exactly.
Yeah, we could go on and on. I am so grateful for both of you for taking the time today and for joining me in this conversation, for everything that you do. Please go check out Threshold. Can't wait to see what you do this season, Amy. Your work is so important, so valuable. Vienna, for all that you do and your music and your activism. So grateful to all of it. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Steve.